Welcome to Natural News University, where the experts speak out. So Daniel, when you're thinking about the genetics of the food that we eat, what, for example, would be the best raw milk to have for those that like that?
All right, well, many of us are now able to digest milk as adults. This is a new trait. It's only been around for about 7,000 years. We talk about people being lactose intolerant. Everyone used to be lactose intolerant as adults. We've actually genetically changed ourselves in order to be able to digest milk. It's very interesting. So some of us are lactose persistent. If you can consume milk without having digestive problems, here's what you want to look for. You want raw milk that's not been pasteurized. You want to be sure that milk's not been homogenized. The way you know if it's homogenized is that the fat or the cream will not separate from the rest of the milk.
Right.
If it floats to the top, it's not homogenized. You want to choose those milks or butter or cream from strong, healthy animals that are fed grass their entire life. That is critical. These are ruminant animals and they eat grass. And if we feed them grains like corn, they become very sick and they produce aberrant molecules that make us allergic or make us sick. So we want to find grass-fed animals. Now, I'd recommend a website to anybody who's looking for real milk to go to realmilk.com, which is a great free website where you can find farmers in your state. Now, I don't know the situation in New York, but most of the country right now, it's becoming illegal to get raw milk.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, here in Maine, you can purchase it from the farmer, but the farmer is not allowed to advertise that he has it, and he's not allowed to put it in stores. So it's going underground. Raw milk's becoming black market. If you have concerns about the safety of real raw milk, remember people have been drinking milk raw forever, 7,000 years, up until just recently in history. Of course it's safe, we know it's safe.
And that's without refrigeration.
That's exactly. Now, what's going on today is that the industry has gotten so big, and people don't realize that the milk they buy at the supermarket is amongst the most processed food they eat. That milk's been completely disassembled and reassembled before you buy it.
Isn't it true that the milk that most people are buying too in the stores is coming from a multitude of cows?
A multitude is an understatement, right? Many thousands of animals, many of whom are sick from being fed grain, many of whom live in prison-like conditions. So I suggest going to a farm or becoming part of a farm share if you live in the city, or becoming part of some kind of co-op where you can get your own raw milk. Now, I have the opinion, and we were talking about genetics, that the Holstein cow is a cow that's best avoided by people for milk purposes.
What's the Holstein?
Now, the Holstein is that cow with the black and white spots who we think of when we think of dairy cows. Now, the Holstein is probably the most modified or the most hybridized or the most mutated of all the cows. Now, why it's valuable to farmers is because it produces so much milk. I mean, a tremendous amount of milk. Now, the problem is that casein, which is a milk protein, a lot of us have heard of casein, that's a milk protein that exists all through nature, whether it's human milk or goat milk or sheep milk or cow milk, in a form that we call A2. Holsteins, because of their mutations, have started producing something called casein A1, and a lot of people are allergic to it. So if you've tried raw milk and you thought, oh, this wasn't really right for me, it may have been milk from a Holstein. So what I do is I go to farms that have Jersey cows or Guernsey cows, and these are the sort of the old farm world's cow breeds, varieties, the tried and true trusted cows for dairy products. They don't produce as much milk, but they produce a higher quality milk. If you've been growing up on milk from the supermarket and you've never had milk fresh from a farm, it's night and day. The flavor is incredibly different, and the ability to fuel yourself on those milk fats is different. Remember, it's really the fat you're looking for, not the protein. Avoid skim milk. Skim means you got ripped off. You want to get that fatty, high, heavy cream milk, and even better, just the cream or butter. Those are excellent replacements for what's our natural food. And I think our natural food is the fats from ruminant animals. Just a lot of us don't have access to it today. And milk and butter and cream, they give us access to the fats we need to fuel our bodies so we don't have those crashes and spikes that we get from carbohydrates and sugar.
Broccoli, collards, kale can't really survive in a natural environment. They don't even grow in a natural environment. What about the animals? What about like cows? What about all those animals that are being consumed by people today as a food source?
Right, so let's use cows as a metaphor. Again, cows are really probably the most commonly consumed meat for people in the United States, where does cow come from? Well, cows come from an animal that was called the aurochs. And the aurochs is from Eurasia. And it was a really large animal, like the size of a full-grown bison, with very long horns, and not a domestic animal. I mean, very difficult animal. You couldn't just walk up to one and milk the animal. You would be killed by it. Right? Very aggressive animal. So these are the animals, by the way, that we see painted on the caves in France, painted by the Paleolithic, our primitive ancestors would paint these animals because they would hunt these animals. Now, the aurochs was basically domesticated in 3 places around the world at once and turned into the modern cow. Now, the aurochs is extinct. It's been extinct since 1627. There is no wild cow left. This is different than the dogs, because if we lost every domestic dog today, we would still have the wolf to breed a new dog out of.
Right.
Not so with the cow. The cow's gone. The last cow is gone. This means we are now responsible for the genetics of the cow. One interesting question I have for vegans and vegetarians and animal rights activists, and I do come out of that movement, so I speak this with some understanding of the mentality. What do we do with cows? Do we set them free, where they'll be instantly eaten by predators? Do we put them in zoos, or do we continue to farm them? I mean, we have now a responsibility for the genetic lineage of these animals.
Wow.
Now, there is no wild cow left, which means all the cows being consumed today are sort of like chihuahuas. There's many varieties of cows, like there's many varieties of dog, but no one's consuming the wild animal. This is so different than the meat eating of, say, the Plains Indians here in the United States who hunted the wild bison. That was a wild animal.
Right.
And all its genetics were intact. Now, someone might ask, well, do the genetics of what we eat matter? And so I would say, if they didn't, why would anyone have concern about eating genetically modified produce?
Sure, of course.
We are starting to understand, wait, the genetics might matter. The genetics might matter as much as vitamins, minerals, water content, right? It might be a very pertinent issue that we've never thought about before because we've only been playing with the food for a short time. We might come to find out in the next couple of generations, if not a couple of decades or even years, that the genetic code of what you eat may have a tremendous influence on you and your body, on your mind, on your health, maybe even on your spirit. I think it does, and so I think the foods that are closer to wild make a lot more sense to eat than the foods that are extremely heavily hybridized and today even genetically modified with the genes of other species.
So Daniel, if somebody wanted to buy a good quality beef, how should they go about thinking about this?
Well, they want to get in touch with a farm. You want to get in touch with somebody, like you could go to eatwild.com, which is another great resource for farmers who grow animals on grass. This is, I can't emphasize that enough. These are ruminant animals, they eat grass, and so you want to ask these critical questions. Is this animal grass finished? You'll see sometimes grass-fed or pastured, but that doesn't tell you how the animal lived all the way up until it was processed. If the animal, very often what happens is an animal is raised on grass, and then just before it goes to slaughter, they start feeding it corn to fatten it up and increase the weight so they make more money off the animal. Wow. And to marble it with fat the way that American consumers are used to. You want to make sure your animal is grass finished. Get in touch with a farmer and purchase in bulk so you can buy a quarter or a side or even a whole animal. And you'll get to choose, just like if you went to the pet store or you were going to go see a breeder and you were going to buy a dog or a cat. Especially with dogs, we don't just randomly pick any animal, just take any type of dog home. You need to know the breed. Is it going to be big, small? Will it be good with kids? You don't just randomly end up with an animal usually. When you're going to buy a cow or buy meat, you can do the same thing, and you can look at what breed you're purchasing. We just recently purchased meat from the Scottish Highland variety, and we did that because we learned that was the only variety that the royal family eats.
Yeah, you were talking about this before we got started here. Why do they choose just that animal?
I think there's genetic questions that go very deep in our culture, many of which have essentially been written out of our history books. The word genetics today is the blanket term for a type of science that was once called eugenics. And eugenics has been all but written out of history, and what's remained has been blamed on Germany.
Yeah,
Germany
sort of
was
a horrible connotation to it.
and well, in Germany was definitely practicing it, but so was the United States, so was Canada, so was Czechoslovakia, so was China. Many countries were practicing this very conscious genetic manipulation on many species, but especially on our own. I would say this: the royal families feel they're royal because of their bloodline, which is their genetics, and they're very particular about genetics. And I thought it interesting that they would only eat this one type of cow, and I gotta say it's a very beautiful animal, a very long, shaggy hair, gorgeous cow, but we thought we'd go with that genetic as well. There are many, many, many breeds of cows to choose from, just like there's many breeds of dog to choose from. And so if you're gonna buy this type of domesticated animal, I'd recommend do a little research, see where you're investing your money, and buy the healthiest, strongest animal you can. I always also like bison as an option, because bison is a completely undomesticated animal. When you buy bison meat, you're essentially getting wild genetics. There's a big difference between feedlot cows and the cows that you'd find at a grass-fed farm somewhere in your local area.